Jar, Jam Jar. Everyone to listen to Jam Jar, Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Oh, put your ears on, man. Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Everybody out there listening to Jam Jar. Yeah, jump and shout. What it's all about. Jump and shout. Shout it out. Everybody listens to Jam Jar, Jam Jar. There you are. To Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Oh, spread it around. Whew. Well, hello out there, all you fabulous people that tune into Jam Jar. Great to have you on board. We've got a great program today. A very interesting gentleman just happened to fly in from the Antarctica, some other place or whatever. But anyway, we're looking forward to that. So, yeah, good to have your company today. And what's happening? What's happening? Well, I'll tell you what is happening with this prolonged sort of nice, beautiful weather we're having. We're having a lot more gigs, of course. Some actually in fairly humid and hot conditions, especially if they're outside. But, yeah, so there's a lot of music things happening at the moment in the Wairarapa. For instance, coming next Thursday, not tomorrow, because we'll be on the air tonight, of course, but the following Thursday we've got our Gladstone Music Club, and that's becoming very popular. We've actually moved outside now into the open space, onto the veranda. We had 122 people there last time, so that was great. And all musicians from all over Wairarapa. It was just fabulous. So that's coming up. We've got the Tin Hut that's firing up again, Dr. Rob Graffia, and he's got a few artists from overseas, not sure exactly who they are, but apparently, classy acts. They're on actually tonight. So if you probably won't hear this program, but it pays to be aware that there's good things happening at the Tin Hut on a regular basis, and Rob Munsell seems to have picked up on that one, and they have all sorts of artists that come through. So what else is happening? There's not a lot happening with the Iberia, or at the moment there's a change in ownership there, and there used to be regular gigs there, but we'll see what happens. We'll keep our finger on the pulse of things, and if something comes up, I'll definitely let you know. Because that's a nice little gig to play as well. And other than that, I think there's just the normal sort of gigs that are on in the pubs, and just keep your ears to the ground. No visiting musicians. But there's an international act coming through to Aratoi. And if I'd had my act together, I'd better tell you exactly who they are. But a duo touring New Zealand at the moment. I'm coming up in the next week, within the next week. Keep your ears open for that one. They're supposed to be very, very good. And because Aratoi is now in the business of supporting the local acts more as well, so they'll have someone to actually front that whole show. I'm not sure who I think it's Graffia actually that are fronting that show. But anyway, that's another thing to look forward to. So good on Aratoi, because they're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're actually supporting local acts. Great stuff. Okay, so that's probably about enough of me and what's happening around. They're pretty well advertised, most things now. If you want to know what's happening in one stop, go to the music shop, where Steve and Bryn are, and on the window, that window pretty well has everything that's happening that's on musically. And so you get a pretty look into what's going on. There's a lot of school things happening, choirs and stuff like that, and they're quite interesting sometimes. It's good to see the young people that are getting into music and singing, and of course the up-and-coming generation of musicians and singers. So it's good to see that there's a healthy atmosphere with musicians and music in the Wairarapa. Okay, so without further ado, we've got this special guest with us, a man who really who I've admired for a long time. He's been a good friend. We were out of touch for quite a long time, but I'd like to introduce to everyone and the listeners and the TV viewers out there, Mr. David Berry. Dave, great to have you on the show, mate.
Delighted to be here, an absolute thrill after a few years of not being in touch together, and then to run into you when I randomly drove into town a few months ago was just fantastic. So delighted to be here on your show and in this wonderful town.
Great. Yeah, because we were a big surprise to everyone when we heard that Dave Berry's coming to town.
Well, that's very nice. I'm very flattered.
So, yeah, the reputation sort of precedes your excellence and what. But anyway, great to have you with us, mate. And I hear there's a possibility at some stage over there may be moving here.
Just in the process of moving. Yes,
yeah.
I've made the decision.
Right.
And so, yeah, I'm basically here as near as makes no difference. And I will be repairing guitars, making guitars, and looking to perform after a period of semi-retirement. I've decided to hit the tracks again, as it were.
Great stuff. Okay, well, Dave, let's go back to maybe the beginning and tell us a bit about yourself and you know, obviously you had an interest in music at a fairly early age, I would think, but you give us a little bit of a rundown.
Yeah. Born in Wairarapa, up on the east coast. Age of 7, moved to live in, and then got interested in music, as many of us do, by playing at the local church, St Andrew's Presbyterian Church, where I was allowed to jam along with the pipe organ. And then got into the local country music club, again, you know, fairly typical small town things, and this is around about 1970. I became rapidly fixated, I think would be the best description, by the hardware of music, amplifiers, guitars, microphones and things like that. So the interest in music was as much propelled by my interest in mechanical and electronic things. After high school and an unsuccessful stint at Teachers College, where I discovered I didn't work well within systems, I got into the retail music trade in the early to mid-70s in Wellington. Worked for or managed most of the stores in town over a period, and eventually in 1990 ended up with my own business, the Kiwi Music Company, where for 10 years we were, I suppose, the cool store in town. We had a service ethic and a connection with the community that we were part of that was very good, and it was a very fertile time in the Wellington music scene.
Absolutely.
And parallel to all that, I kept playing as, I guess, a guitarist for hire, weddings, parties, everything. I produced records, did sessions, etc., etc. In a small country, I guess it helps to be versatile, and I have been lucky to have some versatility.
Absolutely. Well, that's pretty. So far, so good. I mean, basically, that's a lot of squeezing in to do over the years there, Dave, and still playing a little bit.
Yep, still playing. Yeah. I haven't played professionally for a number of years, simply because I had other things happening in life.
Yeah.
But I discover, as every time I pick up the guitar, particularly if I'm working on or repairing instruments, that I still seem to have a certain ability, and with the Wairarapa being, as you're very well aware, quite a fertile place creatively, I've got definite plans to get out and start playing again. Fortunately, music, as we both know, is a whole of life thing, and unlike sports people, we don't have to give up when our knees give up, so as to speak. So I intend to go with my boots on, and I'm about to put my boots on again. So
great stuff. Yeah. Well, it's so good to have you back here after all those years. And the other thing that sort of I think is probably important is that you have struggled with some real health issues, and you've been able to actually come to terms with that and actually overcome that. And I think that's probably, for me anyway, that's the day I know. Never ever say give up or this is the end, and this is as good as it gets, because I was following that when I remember following when you were really sick that particular time, and your ability to hang in there and fight back and said, oh no, mate.
Yeah,
and you know,
yeah, lucky to be blessed with a certain amount of relentless positivity.
Yeah,
yeah, it certainly was a shock. I mean, I was it was probably about 6 years ago now. I certainly don't count. But I was diagnosed with advanced metastasised prostate cancer. It got into my my lower spinal vertebrae. Got close to, well, I suppose there was some semi-paralysis and the usual pain and things. And after having been confronted with my own mortality, I just refused. I went along with the treatments, and wonderful, wonderful people at Oncology in Wellington who've been nothing but fully supportive.
Yeah.
I just basically refused to acknowledge that this was it. The community cancer nurse who briefed me before I went in for chemo a number of years ago now, turned out to have been the same nurse who provided palliative care to Freddie Mercury of Queen when she was on her OE. So I've always thought that maybe she was perhaps sent by Freddie, and I took that as a very positive sign. And as I was asking her what I might expect and how I'd have to rearrange my life and things like that, she just said, live your life as normal. Live your life as normal. And so that's simply what I've tried to do, just live my life as normal.
Yeah.
I refuse to accept any ideas that in any way I might be here for less than whatever my allotted time is. And of course, like many of us who've reached mature years, if you are confronted with your own mortality in various ways, makes you realise how precious every day is.
Absolutely.
So it's just about, hitting it hard and keeping going.
And going well.
Yeah, and I feel real fit. I'm very blessed.
Yeah. Great stuff. Now, so you were playing with a group called the Catalyst Ops, is that right, Dave?
Yes, that's right.
I did hear some tracks there at one stage. A very good band.
Yes, yes.
You were the lead guitarist in that group, or basically?
Yes. I played guitars, plural, various guitars, depending on how many I could be bothered taking with me. It was a great band. It included Colleen Trenwith, who was the fiddle player in the Hamilton County Bluegrass Band, and we had quite a following on a limited regional basis, but were lucky enough to be nominated for Country Album of the Year in something. We went to the Norfolk Island Country Music Festival with the Top Twins, with Jules and Linda, and a number of our songs appeared in a movie called Second Hand Wedding. And on a smallish basis, because it's a small country, we had a consistently good small career, very much enjoying each other's company. But Colleen moved to Tennessee to follow her interest in Appalachian music, and then we could never really replace Colleen, and so the band, we'd done our bit, we'd done our couple of albums and had a lot of fun, and so it quietly folded. But it was one of the best bands I've ever been in, because it had a wonderful sense of camaraderie. We were all old enough to not have any sort of great personal or personality problems. We didn't take ourselves too seriously, and we just got out there and played some rattling good country music, which is interesting because basically I'm a sort of a rock funk soul guitarist, so it certainly wasn't where I would have expected to end up.
But country with an excellence of a whole different, took it to a different level. That was a great band, right? And the tracks I heard was brilliant. Okay, so I think we might play a song. Should we play a song together?
I
think we should do something. Hey,
I think I might even be in tune.
You might even be tuned. Yeah, exactly. So here we are, the Berry Brown duo.
All right, you lead on. Key of?
Key of A.
Right.
A little bit of a bluesy sort of thing. Mama Charlie now, so damn close to the ground. Mama Charlie now, so damn close to the ground. Oh, feel so bad. I feel like this when my woman, she ain't around. Am I tall enough? So damn close to the ground. Am I tall enough, baby? Ain't no good to be around. Feel like this when my baby ain't around. Well, I looked at her once, looked at her twice. I said, man, your eyes, they're cold as ice. How am I tall enough? So damn close to the ground. And I feel like this where my baby ain't around. Give me a solid day. Yeah. Am I tall enough? So damn close to the ground. Ooh, yeah. Am I tall enough? Ain't no danger shot around. Feel like this. My baby ain't around. Well, I went to the river. I go to jump in. My woman comes along. She says, I'll tell you when. Am I tall enough? I'm so damn close to the ground. Oh, and I feel like this where my baby, she ain't around. One more time. Am I tall enough? So damn close to the ground. Am I tall enough? So damn close to the ground. I feel like this when my baby ain't around. Oh yeah. Great stuff, though. Oh,
We might have even been in tune, Stephen.
I think we might have even been in tune, yeah. Great stuff. Hey, well, anyway, let's just get on with I want to just find a little bit about we've done a bit of background. I want to know more about, because now that you're into the craft or the art, if you like, of repairing and building musical instruments, specifically more guitars, but any stringed instrument, I guess.
Yeah. Over the years working in music stores, and certainly back in the 70s where there was no particular craft skills, particularly for guitarists. There were plenty of piano tuners, there were people who could repair brass and woodwind instruments, but apart from the Zetwitz family in Auckland, there was really nobody or very few people in New Zealand who had particular expertise in making guitars play better or repairing them. And so I was thrown into an environment where I had to figure it out myself.
Yeah.
And as I often, with my lifelong interest in how things work and tinkering, I suppose I could say that I spent the first half of my life pulling things to bits to see how they worked, and the second half of my life figuring out how to put them back together properly. Yes, but it was a learn as you go thing.
Been there, done that.
It was a learn as you go thing. I was very lucky. Our mutual friend Ray Penny Mercer, great guitar maker and great player. Ray came back from London in about 1980 after having worked in a very famous guitar repair and making store over there. And I was mentored quite a lot by Ray. Ray had his good down-to-earth Kiwi attitude about what actually matters in terms of making a guitar play properly. So Ray was more into the craft than the hype.
Absolutely.
And so he was a great influence. And then the rest of us, just a lot of flying hours over a long time. I was never that interested in making instruments. I was always I've always seen myself as kind of like a bit of a race car engineer, where you bring your car in, I'll
Yep.
sort it out, tune it up, make it go that much faster. I always
Yep.
saw myself as a mechanic,
Yep.
I suppose, and then just almost by accident fell into making a particular type of guitar. I don't make all types of guitars,
Yep.
I just have a particular interest in one type.
Right, so you've probably seen some pretty amazing instruments over the years, Dave?
Yes,
Can you
I
maybe,
have. New Zealand is knee-deep in interesting guitars, and even the seemingly innocuous guitars, the ones that seem sort of tremendously beaten up and abused and things like that, can be fantastic instruments. Really, I've seen instruments that are very, that could be said to be historically significant, and instruments that have great value. I've repaired a small number of fairly famous instruments. They're all guitars, really. Some of them have more significance or mana perhaps attached to them, but I try to treat them all with equal reverence. They all deserve just as much care.
Yeah.
I had a collection of 100 guitars at one stage. I got very interested in what you might term off-brand guitars, not the famous brands, the ones that were just next door to the famous brands, and that ended up being a collection of 100 guitars, but I then thought to myself that it was probably really not the best idea for one person to own 100 guitars, and then there was 100 people who didn't have an interest in guitar in their lives, so I released them all into the wild in about the year 2000, and I now just have my working instruments.
Yeah, you quite had an amazing collection of the old Jansen guitars in your day.
Yes, I had 28 Jansens, and Jansen, for the viewers and listeners, was a New Zealand company who, in the years of heavy import regulation in New Zealand, made guitars and amplifiers in Auckland, much against the odds. It was a small company, perpetually in financial chaos, but they turned out some very interesting instruments, and I ended up with a collection of 28 of them, which again I've released back out into the pastures from whence they came. But Jansen were really the only example of production line amplifier and guitar production in New Zealand. They'd be the New Zealand equivalent, I suppose, of Fender in America, although Fender were a much, much larger operation.
Right. Could you, I'm just wondering, could you dispel this myth, or whether it's a myth or whether it's fact, that Jansen actually, with their, and some of their invaders, or one particular series of invaders, Jansen invaders, used Fender necks? Was that true or not?
I'm not absolutely sure, but as far as I've been able to determine, I don't claim to be a great historian, and again, I'm probably more of a mechanic than anything else.
Right.
My understanding is that in the early days, Jansen and the founder, Bruce Eadie, who I had something to do with before he passed, Bruce explained to me that back in the early days they got what he described as a boxcar of Canadian maple. And so basically a railroad car, wagon in the old terms, full of Canadian maple.
Wow.
And so that's basically the same wood as Fender necks are made of.
Right.
And so their necks were made of maple, and it was from Canada, which is where the good maple is from. I don't know how they got hold of it, but that was what they made their necks from. On the other hand, undoubtedly there would have been local players who may have acquired a Fender neck and fitted it to a Jansen body, and also because there are similarities in the design between the Jansen guitars and Fender hardware, there would have been a certain amount of hardware swapping
and crossover
and hot rodding and things going on, and I think that's where the myth came from. There's a grain of truth in that the wood was the same, but I've never seen a Jansen guitar with something I could identify as an actual factory-fitted Fender neck.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, because I often wondered about that. I'm pleased actually to hear that, because obviously Jansen, with their necks, with making their own necks, is far more authentic to what a New Zealand guitar is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, guys, but what you're doing is so fascinating. We'd like to see you more often on the telly, and the reason why is because you're quite quiet and you're also a long way from the mic.
Okay, right.
So if you want to pull in a bit, and just use a bit more voice.
Yeah, no worries.
And radio listeners, That's cool, but we're just trying to tweak it for the telly a bit.
No
Who
worries
is this
at all.
guy, Dave?
All right.
Thanks, mate.
Take two, testing
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. The story of the Jansen necks, just to get back to that, and you were asking about whether they in fact had Fender origins.
Yeah.
And you were saying that Jansen, that you liked the fact that the necks were made in New Zealand.
Yeah.
What they actually did, because when you make a guitar neck, you have to saw those little slots in the neck
Yep.
to put the frets in.
Yep.
And so what they did was they made their own 32-bladed saw with
Yeah.
saw blades, little saw blades, spaced at the precise intervals where the frets were,
Yeah.
so that in one drop, it was like a drop saw, they could saw all
Yep.
the fret slots at once.
Yeah.
I've no idea why it was 32 bladed, because there are basically usually a maximum of 22 frets on most guitars, with some exceptions. I can only guess that because they made the one saw to do both bass and guitar necks,
right. Yeah.
that one end of the saw with its wider spacing would have done the bass necks, and the other end of the saw would have done the guitar necks.
Yeah.
Sadly, that saw and a variety of other associated machinery was lost in a fire at the factory.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt a certain pang that quite a part of New Zealand music history simply went up in smoke when they had a factory fire. But yes, the 32-bladed saw, an absolutely amazing example of classic Kiwi ingenuity.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. This is the sort of stuff that I think we love to hear about, because people don't realise, that sort of stuff that was what was happening then.
Yes.
Well, we were up with the play without a doubt.
We were. Yes.
I had a Jensen Invader, as you remember, one of my first guitars. Actually, it was second mate. My first guitar was an Antoria. I didn't manage to quite get the sound I wanted out of the Antoria, and so quickly realised I'd have to go to solid body. But my second guitar was a Jensen Invader, push button.
Yes, that's
one,
right.
the ones, and great guitar.
Yes, yours could have been the variation. If it had the push buttons, yours might have been what they called the Jazzman, which was a slight variation.
Yeah.
Although, Jansen being what they were, you'd sometimes see bits from one model crop up on another because they were perpetually short of materials and money, and so yours could have been an Invader with a Jazzman switch on because on the day it was made, that was the only switch they could grab.
Great guitar. All the early gigs at the Place and some of those amazing gigs we did, that was my guitar, brilliant. And the only other Jensen I had was it was Jensen's copy of looked a bit like a Les Paul.
That was called the Jansen Session Man, I believe.
That's the one I had, a black Session Man, Jansen Session Man.
I've seen one of those, and they were, while a lot of the Jansens it could be a little ad hoc in their quality, the Session Man guitar was their more prestige guitar and model as it was after the Gibson Les Paul. It had a greater cachet. And I've seen, I think I owned one or two of those, and yes, very nice guitars indeed. And that would have been a bit of a step up from the Invader, of course.
It was, and of course it was, if you like, it was a poor man's Les Paul, I guess, price-wise, although it sounded every bit as good. In fact, people thought it was a Les Paul until they looked at it and they said, a bit of a surprise. Because they got into amplifiers and speakers and all that sort of stuff a little bit later on after the...
It's hard to know what came first.
One led into the other, I guess.
I don't think there was much of a gap. I think they, in a climate where you just couldn't import anything into New Zealand, they flourished in that area of heavy import regulation. And I think Jansen basically followed more than anything else the Fender pattern of things, where the one company made amplifiers and guitars. I'm not sure what came first. I think it all sort of started to happen in around about the late 50s. And it may be that the amplifiers slightly preceded the guitars, but again, the history is the history's not very complete. Nobody's ever had a really, really definitive history, and unfortunately, again, because of the fire at the factory, a lot of records or evidence have gone over the years, leaving us with the delightful slight mystery that there is.
I think my first amplifier was a bass quad, Jansen bass quad, and a 75 valve amplifier.
Yes.
Was my first amp. Heavy.
Yep.
And you had to be somewhere.
Yep.
Kept you fit.
Well,
But-
they used,
but, you know,
in those days, chipboard was just coming onto the market, and Jansen were enthusiastic users of chipboard,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is one of the densest, heaviest
Oh,
things
yeah.
you could possibly have.
Yeah.
Yes, I think there's a few of us out there that still owe our continued strength and health to having loaded and unloaded all those huge cabinets so many
Absolutely,
times.
mate.
Yes.
Unreal. Yeah. Well, Dave, tell us a bit about what you're doing at the moment. You're repairing, getting all sorts of instruments and guitars in, and you have actually were telling me about that you've built a guitar of your own
Yes.
design, and using, I think you said bamboo. Is
Yes,
that correct?
partly bamboo. It was an accidental thing. A conversation with an old friend one day led me to thinking about how to make guitars using materials other than one might expect. And for the listeners or viewers, most electric guitars are made of maple, rosewood, ash, alder, and other similar hard and medium hard woods, and there is now a long history of those woods being used. Obviously, these days, with concern about sustainability and renewable resources and things, I started to think about what other materials could be used, and eventually discovered a type of bamboo. Here's one I prepared earlier, Stefan. Shall I read
Yes.
for this one? Here's one I prepared
We would
earlier.
love to see it. I'm sure the viewers would be.
Now this is a prototype, which I made in 2012, and like all prototypes, it's pretty rough around the edges, so it doesn't really get points for finish aesthetics. But it's a fully functioning guitar, and it's now done a lot of miles in testing and in various people's hands. What I did was take a fairly familiar style of electric guitar, which is, a shape we all recognise. It's partially hollow inside, so there's nothing at all dramatic or different about the basic shape or silhouette of it. But what I've done is that the body is made of bamboo, and although it may not show clearly on camera, we can see the edge of the bamboo there and how it's been laminated
I can see
up.
that, yeah.
So I use a type of bamboo that's made for architectural applications, not flooring. Many of us are familiar with bamboo being used in flooring, but that's incredibly dense, and you don't want too much density.
Right.
So what I've been able to do, the neck is a conventional maple neck with a rosewood fingerboard. I get them from Japan partially finished, and then shape them and finesse them. The sound of an electric guitar is influenced by a number of different things.
Yeah.
If you have a lot of mass or weight in the body, you have a very even tone and the notes ring out for a long time, but the sound doesn't have a lot of life or air at the top end. It doesn't sparkle.
Okay.
If you have a very light body, low mass, then you get lots and lots and lots of sparkle, but the notes die off relatively quickly. So you get a nice little sound, and then it goes dead.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to get both air and sustain
Yeah.
at the same time. You're always, with an electric guitar, you're always either getting a little bit more air at the expense of sustain of the note, or more sustain at the expense of a little bit of air and life in the tone.
Right.
But with bamboo having incredible linear strength, and it goes back to my keenness for automotive things, what I've developed here is an incredibly high strength chassis with relatively little mass, and so the incredible strength that the bamboo has enabled me to engineer in means that the notes ring for a long time. They're very even, but because there's not a lot of mass involved, there's a lot of air and life in the tone. So I've taken the tonal envelope of the guitar and jacked it out a bit at the top and the bottom. And
So it gives more the colour at the top end. Is it more?
yes,
more
colour at the
sparkle
top end. Those sparkly, I suppose, we could say those sparkly guitar tones characteristic of the Beatles, the Byrds, Tom Petty.
Yeah, exactly. I know what you're talking about.
The Britpop of the 90s, Oasis, anywhere where there's sparkly chiming guitars, I've accentuated that bit of it. And then if we come down to the more sustaining, dark, long
notes,
legato tones, more rock tones, dark tones, they are also there as well. And the electrics of the guitar, which are just passive, they're on one note. There's very, very little new technology here.
Yeah.
But the electrics of the guitar are done so that the player is able to tune more into the sparkle end or more into the dark sustaining end. And it's actually done almost like a radio. The design was done by the now late Bill Lawrence in America, who was a pioneer of making electric guitar pickups.
Yeah.
Bill had a radio frequency background, and so he brought his radio frequency knowledge down into the audio spectrum, and his ideas, which I've combined for my guitar, are more like tuning into a particular sound rather than switching your way to a sound. And so just nothing absolutely revolutionary or groundbreaking, but the combination of a few different things. It's the combination of a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's like, I guess, just sort of like as you say, tuning an instrument. Like when you're with a car, if you like a mechanic and you're tuning up so everything runs just top notch, and so you and it's the same, I guess. I think probably Joe Blow wouldn't know that the wood and how you actually build that guitar. They wouldn't have a clue of actually how that sound is reached, and just hearing you explain it now.
Yeah.
And most people think, well, it's just a bit of wood, and what effect does that have on a guitar?
All the things. It's the sum total of a whole pile of little wee things, and I've because I've dealt with guitars as well as played guitars, because I've bought and sold so many guitars over the years. I've been very lucky to have an opportunity of just developing a slightly innate sense of what works and what doesn't, or what combinations of things do. The dubious benefits of age, Stefan.
Yeah,
yes.
So are there any New Zealand natives that are good for solid bodies?
Yes, there are. And again, I'd have to say that I do not have any specialist knowledge on this. Rimu can be used. Although because Rimu is a very splitty wood, actually machining it or things like that, there are problems with that. Kauri, of course, and Jansen, in fact, used Fijian kauri in a lot of their guitar bodies. So that's a very good body wood, because it's a reasonably dense wood, but not too dense.
Right.
Then there are some of what I suppose you could term the slightly lesser known natives. I've come across people who use Totara, Maori, I believe, Karaka, and these are. And there is another one, and I'm sorry, I don't remember what its name is, but yes, there are a number of New Zealand native woods that are very suitable. Some of them are more suitable for the neck of a guitar, where you do want quite a lot of strength and density. Some of them would be too dense for making a solid body, because they'd be too heavy. But we have wonderful native woods, and there is a company, in fact, up in Taranaki somewhere, called Rare Find Timbers. They're on the internet, and for anybody who's interested in timber or indeed making guitars, what they have is old growth, both native and exotic timbers that come off people's properties in the Taranaki and further afield. If you've got a big old tree that has to come down, they take it, they mill it, and they do specifically sell body blanks and neck blanks for people interested in building their own guitars. And they have a wonderful selection of timbers. As I use bamboo, I haven't had occasion to use their products. Although on a local sense, just when I was looking at moving here and talking to people in town and meeting Stephen from Sealer Music, one of Stephen's family has a pile of large chunks of timber from a Himalayan cedar tree, Himalayan cedar, which was growing in town somewhere, because there's so many wonderful old trees in Masterton because of its longer history. And So tucked in a cowshed on a farm out in the country here is a pile of Himalayan cedar that would make beautiful guitar bodies, and it's something I intend to address at some stage in the future, yes.
Absolutely. Well, this is great stuff, interesting. Now, while I've got you here, I've got one of my students the other day, Dave, came to me, a young boy, and asked the most interesting question, and I sort of gave him an answer to sort of, well, I didn't fob him off, but I thought, well, okay, that should satisfy him for now. But the question was, with a guitar, you get a difference in the of the fret space. So he said, oh, how come they're small up there and big down there? And I said, well, it's to do with harmonics, because when your notes naturally will fall to the bottom side of the tuning note, and by the time, so it's altered slightly as you go up in pitch to keep it in tune. But whether that was a good answer or not, I'm not sure.
A lot of truth, if that be the best word, in that answer, yes. But it's a very complicated one, and I'd have to say I don't have an absolute pat answer for that. What you were talking about relates to what's called intonation, and that is the fact that when you are playing different notes on different strings as you play further up the fingerboard, the relative in-tuneness of it needs to stay the same. The spacing of the frets, and the reason why they are closer together at the end of the neck, if I had to pull out an explanation, when the string is open, we've got the whole speaking length of the string.
Right.
As we progressively fret the string up, the difference between where we're fretting it and the bridge becomes smaller, and as we get further up, the relative difference between the frets becomes smaller, so that the musical intervals remain a semitone each time. So in order for those to be semitones, everything has to be condensed a little bit as we get closer to the top end.
Right, I understand.
And I'd have to say that's the first time anybody's made me explain that, and I hope that was an adequate answer.
Well, I didn't know. He went away thinking, he's only a 7-8-year-old kid, and I'm thinking that's a very good question.
Oh, yeah.
And he put me on the spot, a little, not really, but I mean, I had no idea it was the intonation, harmonics, and adjusting as it went up because of the space. And
that's all part of it. Absolutely
all part of it. So anyway, he seemed to be satisfied with that. And
I've never analysed it. I've just learned how to make it work.
Exactly. So you've got another instrument that you brought in today as well. Is that true, Dave? What else have we got here?
Well, this is an example of me returning to my craft of repairing because of my recent quasi-retirement. I'm not quite sure how full frame this is. Can you see this whole one on the monitor?
Not yet, but I probably will. It'll come up.
Oh, okay. This is an interesting example of guitar history. This is called a Burny, B-U-R-N-Y, made by a Japanese company called Hoshino Gakki, or the other one was Fujigen. What we have in the late 70s in Japan is increasingly sophisticated musical instruments being made, and in America, importers realising that good stuff is being made in Japan. So the increasingly skilled Japanese manufacturers make very, very good copies of American instruments, in this case a 60s era Gibson Firebird, which an original these days would be a $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 guitar without too many problems. So this is called a lawsuit era, because in the very late 70s, an enterprising importer in America started bringing these Japanese-made clones of American-designed instruments into America, and the American companies whose instruments were being copied, at that stage, their quality control wasn't quite so good. And so they immediately saw this huge threat coming in from Japan and threatened to sue the American importer of these Japanese-made instruments. So there's a whole family or short era of these Japanese-produced high-quality clones of American guitars called lawsuit-era guitars. This one's a relatively rare one. The Burny name and the script is designed to look a bit like the same script used by the Gibson company. This is made to the same pattern as a Gibson Firebird of the mid-60s. The Gibson Firebird was designed actually by, the shape of it was designed by an automotive designer, so that if we look at this guitar and think of 60s, late 60s era American automobiles, this could have tyres on
Oh,
it and
yeah.
screaming down the road for all the
Absolutely, yeah.
difference it makes. And so we have
It's
American industrial automotive design. This one, if you drop one of these guitars over backwards,
Yeah.
the first thing that hits the floor
Yeah.
is the headstock end,
Oh, yeah, so that-
and they shear
right off there.
right
Yeah.
through there.
Yeah.
And so this one sadly came in just completely split through there. It's
Yeah.
a classic break that
Right.
I've seen dozens, if not hundreds of times. So very carefully and gently it gets glued back together. And as it was a fairly clean break, it's a pretty invisible repair. The guitar's probably at least as strong as it originally was. What have we got here? This is what, a good 40 plus years old.
Yeah.
It's good for another 40 or 50, 60 years now,
Absolutely.
and an enjoyable one to do, because
Yeah.
a slightly unique design with a bit of an interesting backstory.
Yeah.
I like all guitars, but some of them just have a little bit more.
So that was a local one, bought in, Dave?
No, this came from the Wellington area.
Oh, okay. Do you think there's a few of them out there? Or not?
It's very hard to say. I know that I'll just pop this one safely
Yeah.
back so I don't break it again.
Yes.
Although in theory it should be stronger than when it was new.
Yeah.
I was in the retail music business for a solid 40 years, and I know how many guitars I personally sold, and so from that I can extrapolate how many guitars got sold in
Yeah.
New Zealand.
Yeah.
And I can now look back at 40 years of all the different eras and the brands that cropped up and things like that.
Right.
And I have no idea where they all went. All I can say is that there's an awful lot of beds, wardrobes, cupboards and garages with interesting guitars in. And what I'm seeing a little bit of these days is, for those of us, you and I are sort of the baby boomer generation.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's our kids that are now discovering those guitars, because what I see a little bit more of these days is older and more interesting instruments like the one we've just looked at
Yeah.
being bought in by the sons or daughters of the people who may have played them back in the 70s
Yeah.
when they were in a
Yeah.
band for those few
Yeah.
years before they had a family and
Yeah.
But there's an awful lot of interesting guitars tucked away. I
Yeah.
mean, you yourself
Yeah.
dug
other
one
day,
up, that old lap steel, the old
Yeah.
Hawaiian lap steel.
Exactly.
Yes, yes.
And the young fellow playing in the band last Saturday up at the Music Fest had a Tiesco.
Tokyo Electronic Instrument Company, yes, yes.
And instantly recognisable with the sign, everything on that little sign, Tiesco, and he had no idea really what he had, but it belonged to his grandfather apparently. So that would be 70s, I'd say, at least.
Tiesco could go back into the
Even
60s, actually, yes.
but,
yes.
a neat-looking old guitar. He had taken it to someone to get it actually playable. So, and he said it was quite, and it sounded okay.
Yeah, I suppose
right,
in terms
yeah.
of this public forum, what I could say as a very general comment to people out there is talk to your parents, have a look under the bed, have a look in the garage. That dusty old thing that you might have been walking past for years could be something that's quite interesting.
Yeah,
Obviously, it could have an association with a parent or with a family or a relative, and so they have that status as sort of, family
Yeah.
taonga and things like that. There could be interesting bits of history out there.
Yeah.
A lot of them aren't worth serious money per se. They're probably of more curio value, but they're...
But they definitely have a place.
They
to
have
be,
it. And also, the guitar is a very interesting combination, I think, of functional tool and fashion item.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing. It's an
Absolutely.
interesting combination of
Yeah.
fashion item and tool. And even if, for those of us who have an old guitar that's been in the family, even if it's just basically tidied up, it doesn't have to be restored or things like that. Fantastic wall decorations.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's like my Ibanez ragtime that you worked on.
Yes.
That was belonged to my dad. That was
Yes,
his
that's
first
right.
guitar, and it's got the Diamond pickup that someone fitted into it. And it's a nice guitar. And it plays
Very
great.
functional guitar
Yeah.
with an obvious significance of having
it's
been
got some,
in the family.
That
Yes.
belonged to my dad when he was playing all the gigs around Wellington and doing his thing.
I mean, people often the colloquial name for guitars is often used as axe.
Yeah.
And I suppose if we think back to medieval times, if you had your dad's axe, that was something, wasn't it? So in these modern times where we're not brutalising each other on a routine basis, so you can still have the family axe in your possession, so as to speak.
Yeah. Now, so you're working at the moment, or actually helping out just in a sort of a very casual sort of basis. Occasionally you called in to do a few things at Steve's shop. Is that?
Yes, I'm just getting back into things because I've had some health things to take care of. I basically pretty much retired a few years ago to just focus on wellness. And now that I discover that I seem to be well, I'm slowly looking at getting back into repairing on a full-time basis. So I'm sort of, I guess you could say, I'm transitioning back into my craft.
Absolutely, that's good to hear.
My arrival in the Wairarapa was absolutely, completely accidental. I was sitting around happily doing very little, and I got a message on Facebook from Stephen saying, "Oh, are you interested in looking at some repairs?" And at that stage, I wasn't. And then I was sitting around one day, and I remembered Stephen's Facebook message, and I was just in Upper Hutt at the time, just doing a bit of a tiki tour around. So I thought, well, I'll drive across the Rimutakas and see what happens. And so I drove across the Rimutakas, stepped into Stephen's store, met him, and because I knew you were living over here, and a number of years ago, you'd left a guitar with me for repair.
That's right.
And then we'd lost touch with each other.
Yep.
I asked Stephen where he knew where you were, and 30 seconds later, you walked into the store, and the rest is recent history, I guess.
Yeah. That's good. That's real good.
So
news,
yes, I'm starting to,
early stages.
Now that I'm moving back over here, I'm starting to repair things and get back. To doing the thing that I love the most. I mean, I've been lucky enough to do a variety of different things in my life, both within and outside the music trade. I was in the photographic industry for a number of years. And now I'm back doing exactly the same thing I was in the early to mid-70s, which is fine as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think we might play another song, Dave.
Why not? You lead, I'll follow.
Yeah, well, might do an original, actually. I might do you can just noodle away in the background. It's
just
a little thing.
Throw me a key.
The D major 7.
All right.
Yeah, you'll get. Catch a cat in Kathmandu, yeah. Put him in a catman stew, 'cause there'll be song for me and you, yeah, down in Kathmandu. I said, catch a cat in Kathmandu. Put him in a catman stew, 'cause there'll be song for me and you, yeah, down in Kathmandu. Shadoo-doo, shoo-da-da-da-da-da-da, da-da-doo-doo, shoo-da-da. Shabba-dabba, shabba-da, shabba-dabba-da, choo-doo-doo-doo, scoop-a-ba-dee-ba-ba, scoop-a-ba-dee-doo-ba, meow, choo-da-ba-ba. Ooh, catch a cat and Kathmandu, yeah. Put him in a catman stew, 'cause there'll be some for me and you, yeah, down in Kathmandu. Big old Boone and old Rangoon, you hear him sing beneath the moon. He's singing slightly out of tune. That's 'cause he's just an old baboon. Chinchillas chomping, chowing China, oh, at the Golden Dragon Diner. Crazy cats from Carolina, born in Kathmandu. I said, catch a cat in Kathmandu, yeah. 'cause there'll be some for me and you, yeah, down in Kathmandu, way down in Kathmandu, way down in Kathmandu, way down in Kathmandu, way down in Kathmandu. Choo, 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 wah, wah, da, da, da. Yeah. Hey, we're going to have to wrap this program up fairly soon. Been an absolute pleasure and to have you on board.
Oh, just delightful,
And,
Stefan. You've got no idea.
It's just amazing. It's almost like yesterday, actually, in some ways. But it's so good to have you with us, Dave. And I'm sure
Lovely to be in this town. I'm really looking forward to seeing what interesting guitars come out of the woodwork over here. I'll tell you that much. It's the guys at Sealer Music, the music store here, have an absolute mad passion for what they're doing, and that was quite a big part of deciding to move over. Is that it's they really do give a damn, and so just contributing by sort of making better guitars day by day is going to be most enjoyable, I think.
Yeah, great stuff, mate. Okay, so listeners and viewers, of course, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Stefan.
And Dave, thanks again for being with us. We might go out in the little jam jar song, I think. But the other thing, just before I go, a big thanks to Dan Broughton. He's our sponsor for Jam Jar. Dan, without you, we don't have a program. And so we thank you for hanging in there with us. And Dan's the man who does the websites. He's in Carterton there. Beautiful websites. If you need a website, Dan Broughton, Wairarapa Web Design it's called. He's the sponsor for this particular program. And a big thanks to Veronica and Michael out there, and they're hard-working individuals to keep this radio station up and running, Arrow FM, so we thank them also. So here, let's finish with our song. Dave, play along with us.
Right.
What we're going to do. This is Jam Jar. It's the same key. Here's the last is D majors there. Just two kid guys. Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Oh, we're all listening to Jam Jar. Jam Jar, Jam Jar, just tell me who you are. We're gonna jump about, shout it out. Everybody listening to Jam Jar, yeah. Oh, Jam Jar, oh yeah. Spread it around. I said Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Jam Jar, Jam Jar. Ooh, listen to Jam Jar. Spread it around. I'm gone.